what is necessary for astrophotography, especially if you're considering buying the right equipment. And I've got some special tips for you at the end of the video, so make sure you watch to the end. Enjoy the video. There are different kinds of astrophotography. You can capture the moon, you can capture deep sky objects like nebulae. And some people like to do planetary astrophotography. Another kind of astrophotography involves shooting the Milky Way in wide field. This setup was my starting point. The limitations of this setup, of course, is shorter exposures and therefore limited deep sky imaging. You will need to use a remote shutter so that you can open and close the shutter without shaking the camera between exposures. In this setup, you'll be limited to quite short exposures, and by that I mean of the order of a maximum of 20 seconds. This is enough to take Milky Way shots, but not much more. And this is an upgrade I made after dabbling with Milky Way widefield photography. This setup consists of your DSLR camera attached to your telescope, and I'm going to cover that in detail in another video. The setup that I used was a Celestron 130 SLT telescope. That's a reflector telescope with an aperture of 130 millimeters. The aperture is the size of the opening at the front of the telescope and also represents the size of your mirror at the end of the tube. The larger the aperture, the more light the telescope collects. This setup has an Alt-Az mount. The Alt-Az mount is an easier to use mount and so is more suitable for beginners. With this setup, I was able to achieve a maximum of 45 to 60 seconds, but no more than that. This was enough to take deep sky images. The Az-Alt mount is used by many telescope enthusiasts, but is not really great for tracking stars because it only moves in 2 axes. I had to reject as many as 40 or 50% of my images. This upgraded setup is the actual setup that I use now. The upgrades that I've made are that I've changed the DSLR camera to an Astro camera, which is also cooled. The advantage of cooling a camera down is that it reduces the noise in your images. This is another subject which we'll come back to again in another video. The other main upgrade to this setup is that the Az-Alt mount has been changed to an equatorial mount. An equatorial mount is a little bit more complicated and needs to be polar aligned. I do have a video all about how to polar align using Sharpcap Pro. The link will be in the description for you there too. Other elements to this more advanced setup are that I also use an auto guider scope and camera, which allows me to have even longer exposures and higher quality frames. When I say higher quality frames, I mean that there's much less star trailing. The stars look much better, and I can now image for minutes at a time. This means I can capture much fainter deep sky objects. Therefore, this setup is really suitable for deep sky imaging. So a message I'd like to give you in terms of selecting your optimum astrophotography setup as you progress from beginner level is to concentrate first on the wider field tripod and DSLR and get your practice in such things as camera settings and so on. Let's talk now about the key equipment features that you need to know about as a beginner astrophotographer. The mount is the key to everything. The most stable mount is the best mount. We need to talk about cameras too. Terms like sensor size. This is the size of the camera sensor. That does matter in many ways. It will influence the size of the image, the shape of the image that you generate. Now let's talk about megapixels. One important thing about taking digital photos is the resolution. Resolution basically means how much detail there is in your picture. And this is because of the number of pixels. If you increase the number of pixels in your image, you'll get increased definition and increased detail. So some cameras have more megapixels than others. Again, I'll put another link in the description. I have a nice page on my website which answers the question, how many megapixels do you need in a camera for astrophotography? And the answer is quite surprising. So do look at that link too. Now let's talk about noise. Every camera produces noise because any electronic device will contain extra signal which we don't want, which is basically going to cause random noise in digital photography. With astrophotography, where your signal is so weak, we really need to keep noise as low as possible. This is why in my present setup, I use a cooled camera. Cooling a camera means you'll have much less noise. Now to talk about telescopes. If you're new to using a telescope, you may not know the basic language that you need and the basic terms that you need to know. I've already explained in the video earlier about aperture, and basically you need as big an aperture as you can reasonably handle. All you need to know about focal length is it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the lens in a camera or a telescope. If you have a longer focal length, the field of view will be smaller and your lens or telescope will zoom into an object more. So a lower focal length will give you a wider field. And that's basically all you need to know at this stage about these basic terms. A few concluding points before I end this video for you, and I hope you've got a lot of value from it. If you have got some value from this video, then I'd really appreciate it if you help me out, like the video, and do subscribe to the channel for more, as this really is one in many videos which I plan to prepare for astrophotography beginners. So a few handy tips to finish this video. Remember to start simple and update your setup in steps as your knowledge and experience increases. Today we've talked about different setups that you can use as you begin and progress in astrophotography. In my next video, I plan to talk about how to choose your astrophotography targets. And I hope you'll enjoy that one. So see you next time. This has been Carl Pereira from Astro Imagery.